All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. So each year, the pro football's newest Hall of Fame class can take up to seven new members. But this year, the committee only decided to induct four, as it's going to be defensive end Jared Allen, defensive back Eric Allen, wide receiver Sterling Sharp, and tight end Antonio Gates. Now, since 2018, Peyton Manning has been the only quarterback that has been elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And of those who were expecting Peyton's younger brother Eli to join him in Canton this year, they're going to have to be patient. This was Eli Manning's first year on the ballot to be potentially enshrined in Canton. And although that Manning's numbers are good enough to have him in the conversation to get into the Hall of Fame, the committee thought otherwise. So during Eli's 16-year NFL career, all with the New York Football Giants, his record as a starting quarterback was 117 and 117. He had 57,023 passing yards at the time of his retirement, was seventh all time. He also has 366 career passing touchdowns and a completion percentage just north of 60. Now, definitely something is working in Eli's credit. He was a two-time Super Bowl champion. And in those contests, he was a two-time Super Bowl MVP. He went toe-to-toe with Tom Brady and the New England Patriots, and he beat him twice on the game's biggest stage. But winning the two Super Bowls as a starting quarterback does not guarantee enshrinement into Canton. Just look at Jim Plunkett. He won a Super Bowl in 1980 for the Oakland Raiders and another one in 1983 for the Los Angeles Raiders. But he's never really come up in the conversation as far as getting into Canton. Now, on the flip side, Eli's critics and his detractors will be quick to harp on the fact that he was only a four-time Pro Bowl selection and he was never an NFL MVP. And they'll also be quick to say that Eli led the NFL in interceptions three times. All of this is very true. Okay. But my question is, what exactly is the criteria for the Hall of Fame? I know that different eras, the game was different in different eras. I totally get it and totally understand for all positions. But I'm going to bring up one name right here, Joe Willie Namath. And the reason why I say it is this: Namath finished his career with a record of 62 wins, 63 losses, and four ties. And that's combined for both the NFL and the AFL, where he began his career. Now, for Namath's Hall of Fame career, he threw 173 touchdown passes while also getting picked off 220 times. And he had a completion percentage of 50. Completion percentages really have to be thought about for the era the guys played in. More physicality, more bumping and running with the receivers down the field, more hitting of quarterbacks in that era, okay? But you look at the Jets championship season of 1968, Namath threw more interceptions than touchdowns that year. While in Super Bowl III, of course, granted, the biggest game of Joe Willie's career, and of course, his infamous guarantee that the Jets were going to beat the Colts. Namath didn't have a big game. Okay, he was more of a game manager. The Jets ran the football effectively in Super Bowl III against the Baltimore Colts, but it was the Jets' defense that took care of business as they forced five Baltimore turnovers. And of course, an underlying factor in that game that a lot of people don't talk about. Weeb Eubank, the head coach of the Jets at the time, previous to that, was a longtime assistant for the Baltimore Colts, and he kind of knew their game plan better than they did, and it showed throughout that contest. Now, going back to right now, okay, the quarterbacks that Eli is going to be compared to from his era, of course, his brother Peyton. You think about Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, who is still playing, Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger, Philip Rivers, even Tony Romo and Matthew Stafford. And of course, the question is going to be, where does a guy like Eli fit into that mix? Heel, what's going on, my man? How you doing, man? Happy Friday to you, and I hope that all is going well for you heading into this weekend. Just talking a little about Eli and missing the cut, if you will, to get into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, at least on year one of his eligibility. But in those quarterbacks in Eli's era, Peyton, of course, his brother, Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, those guys are on a whole nother level. And we saw Peyton get in right away. All of those other guys, it's going to be the same thing for them, okay? I think Eli's in that mix with Big Ben, Philip Rivers, Romo, and Stafford, excuse me. Okay. And for Eli, there were two halves to his career. You're talking about the first half of his career with the Giants, where they were consistently a playoff team. They got those two championships, but after that last championship in 2011, New York only had two more winning seasons with Eli at quarterback. Not that much of a fault of his because the organization didn't do him any favors as far as drafting and developing talent. And of course, that has continued right now for the Giants as they are a bad franchise. But at the end of the day, Eli clearly did not get in on the first ballot. And in my opinion, and I talked about this at the time of his retirement, okay, I said if he didn't get in right away, he was going to have to wait a little bit. And I think that is going to become a reality right now. Why? Because Drew Brees is going to be on the ballot next year for the first time. I don't think anybody's going to even think twice about not putting Drew Brees into the Pro Football Hall of Fame immediately. Philip Rivers is going to be on the ballot for the first time next year. In 2027, we're talking about Ben Roethlisberger, and then in 2028, we're talking about Matt Ryan as well as Tom Brady. Now, another question for me is: being a first ballot Hall of Famer overrated? I'm going to say yes and no because I say yes from the standpoint that we've had some great players, okay, and I mean some great players over the years not be first ballot Hall of Famers. An example of that is Fran Tarkenton. Fran Tarkenton, when he retired from the NFL as a starting quarterback in the Minnesota Vikings, was the NFL's all-time leader in passing touchdowns as well as passing yardage. It took him to the third try to get in. You think about some of the great wide receivers like a Chris Carter, even great tight ends like Shannon Sharp. They didn't get in the first time. A guy like Kevin Green, and I lobbied for Kevin Green. Of course, I'm not. I don't have anything close to being a voter or anything like that. But I'm just a guy who talked to people, anybody who I knew who wanted to talk sports with. I'm like, listen, this guy should be in there. Kevin Green has a 160 career sacks. There were guys that were behind him that had much less sacks than Kevin Green. And to give you an idea, even to this day, the only guys who have more official sacks than Kevin Green in NFL history, we're talking about Reggie White and Bruce Smith. Okay, Kevin Green eventually got in, but nonetheless, it happens. Okay, I feel like the first ballot Hall of Fame criteria, and this is where I think people get lost on it because I think the term first ballot Hall of Famer gets thrown around too much nowadays, kind of like the same word GOAT or the term GOAT gets thrown around too much. Okay. There's only less than a handful of guys per sport that you can put into the conversation saying they are the greatest of all time. That term gets thrown around way too much, in my opinion. Okay. And I think the same thing for first ballot Hall of Famers. I think when it comes to first ballot Hall of Famers, regardless of the sport, you've got to be the elite of the elite. When you think about first ballot Hall of Famers, you think about guys like Jerry Rice. You think about guys like Reggie White. You think about guys like Lawrence Taylor, Joe Montana, Dan Marino, and so many others. Okay. But it's like the elite of the elite. So I think at the end of the day, Eli's going to have to wait, a little bit. I think he will get in at some point, but even if anybody thinks it's going to happen next year, I don't see it happening. You're saying you're not as knowledgeable on football, but to me, Eli was never as scary as Rodgers or Brady. And again, to your point, It's one of those where a lot of people who are doing, the balloting, they're always, regardless of the sport, they're always going to look back for the most part. Okay. And I'm going to touch on this a little bit more and say, hey, was this person one of the best players of his era? Eli Manning totally had Hall of Fame moments. Of course, there were some times where it didn't work out, but like I said before, what is the criteria? Because there are some guys that are in the Hall of Fame right now that I question it, but then also there are guys that are on the outside looking in, which I am questioning as well. While why they are not there. So again, like I said, what is the criteria? But nonetheless, big time congratulations to the four guys that are going in because I think they all deserve it. Jared Allen, one of the best pass rushers of his era, first for the Kansas City Chiefs, and then, of course, for the Minnesota Vikings. You think about Antonio Gates, a basketball player turned football player. And of course, Gates did have a football background. Problem was, Michigan State wanted him to be a defensive lineman. He didn't want to do that. So he went to Kent State to play basketball, came into the NFL as an undrafted free agent, and had a phenomenal career. You think about what preceded him, even in that division. We're talking about Tony Gonzalez, the football and basketball player for the Kansas City Chiefs. And then Antonio Gates basically came in and built off of what Tony Gonzalez was doing at that position. And of course, you think about the Chargers in that era with the likes of Phillip Rivers at quarterback, LaDainian Tomlinson at wide receiver, Antonio Gates at tight end, and the late great Vincent Jackson at wide receiver. So Antonio Gates definitely well deserving. Eric Allen, one of the best defensive backs in the 1990s. You think about him on the back end of those Buddy Ryan defenses with the Philadelphia Eagles, with the likes of Reggie White, Jerome Brown, Clyde Simmons, Mike Golick, Seth Joyner, and then Andre Waters, just to name a few. Eric Allen was right in that mix. Also played with the Saints as well as the Oakland Raiders. And then, of course, Sterling Sharp. Sterling Sharp is a guy who would have moonwalked into the Hall of Fame had it not been for the fact that his career was cut short due to that horrific neck injury. You think about the great Shannon Sharp, another guy who didn't get in right away. Okay, but of course, we don't talk about that now because we all know he was a phenomenal player, well deserving. But nonetheless, Shannon Sharp has a long time talked about the fact that he wouldn't be who he is right now if it wasn't for his brother Sterling, who paved the way for him. Hill, you're saying T.O. should have been a first ballot. Him not going in the first time cheapens the Hall of Fame. Listen, I think T.O. not getting in the first time around wasn't about his stats. It was the fact that people didn't like him. But at the end of the day, the Hall of Fame, regardless of the sport, is not a popularity contest. Was somebody one of the better players of his era? T.O. definitely was. T.O. definitely deserved to be put into the Hall of Fame right away. They made him wait to year number 3. And of course, what added fuel to the fire for Terrell Owens is the fact that, hey, his numbers and Randy Moss's numbers are basically right there together. And Randy Moss got in right away. And that's no disrespect to Randy Moss because Randy Moss was a bad dude on the gridiron. I mean, that man basically ran one route for his career. But you know what? At the end of the day, he made that one route look pretty and he rode that route all the way to the Hall of Fame. But I think that just added fuel to the fire of T.O. And of course, the rest is history. New York Mets lover, what is going on? Love that handle. You're saying you're a Giants fan. Um, I'll tell you like this, and I'm going to hit you two ways in this one. First and foremost, um, I think Eli will get in to the Hall of Fame at some point, and I'll tell you like this as well. You definitely got to check out this channel if you haven't already, because I did talk about the New York Mets getting back somebody whose number is at the end of your handle right there, number 20, and I'm talking about Pete Alonso. I talked about that last night. I think that is a big power move for the Metropolitans heading into the 2025 season. And of course, with the NFL season ready to wrap up after this Sunday, pitchers and catchers are about to report, and there are plenty of expectations for the Mets. So basically, you swap blue and red of the Giants for the football season, and now you're about to go to blue and orange for baseball, which is right around the corner. But, getting back to the Hall of Fame, I'll tell you like this. I am not going to question the four guys that the Hall of Fame committee did put in because I think all of them were deserving. Like I said, up to seven can go each year. And I think the committee, in my opinion, did drop the ball because that meant that there are three slots available. And there is a slew there is a slew of guys that are more than deserving who have been long overlooked for the Hall of Fame. And at some point, they need to put them in there. You think about Jim Marshall for the Minnesota Vikings. And of course, the Purple People Eaters of the 1960s and 70s for the Vikings. Two of those guys are already in the Hall of Fame. I'm talking about Alan Page and we're talking about Carl Eller. Jim Marshall deserved to be right there. You're talking about a guy who had the NFL's Iron Man streak as far as consecutive games played. And that was a record that stood until I want to say it was 2006 when Jeff Fiegel was a punter. No disrespect, but a punter breaking that record. And you think about Jim Marshall playing at defensive end in the 1960s and 1970s in the National Football League. Much more physicality than we see nowadays. The playing conditions were not the same, you name it. And of course, that man went out there Sunday after Sunday and gave it his all. Not to mention, he finished his career with 130 career sacks. L.C. Greenwood on that defensive line for the famed steel curtain of the 1970s Pittsburgh Steelers. And of course, at some point, it gets to the point people will say, well, how many guys can you put in from one championship team? And of course, just looking at the defensive side of the ball alone for those Steelers of the 70s, of course, we got Mean Joe Green in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, Jack Lambert and Jack Ham at linebacker, and of course, the great Mel Blount at cornerback. But LC was no joke as well on that defensive line. And I think at some point, the late, great LC Greenwood and those gold cleats need to be put in Canton. Dan Reeves, and I think this is a head coach that has been overlooked for far too long. Dan Reeves is a top 10 all time in wins for head coaches in the National Football League. Never won a Super Bowl as a head coach, but he, along with Bud Grant and Marv Levy, all have gotten a team to the Super Bowl four times, and of course, they never won. Bud Grant and Marv Levy are both in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. On top of that, Dan Reeves took three different teams to the playoffs: the Falcons, the Giants, and the Broncos. And of course, he's one of about a handful of coaches that can say, hey, they got two teams to the Super Bowl: the Falcons once and the Denver Broncos three times. You're saying, to be fair, though, Eli Manning did beat Brady in the Super Bowl two times. Yes, I did talk about that. And you got to respect that, absolutely. But I still do believe that he should be in the Hall of Fame. He'll get there. I truly do think so. He will get there. And it's one of those where, like I said earlier, he's going to have to sit back and wait a little bit now because Drew Brees is on that ballot next year for the first time. I don't think that anybody is going to question whether or not Drew Brees is a first ballot Hall of Famer. You're talking about one of the two guys in NFL history, I think, that passed for more than 75,000 career yards. I'm not sure exactly off the top of my head how many that Brees finished with, but I know it's him and Brady. Okay. Granted, basically what Brees did was indoors, but he did have more Pro Bowl selections. Of course, clearly does not have the amount of Super Bowl wins that Eli Manning does have. He still has one, nonetheless. But I think Drew Brees definitely gets in right away, and because of that, I really I don't see foresee a scenario where the committee could put two quarterbacks in next season. Just a hunch. Okay. You're asking which HOF that's already in uh, do you question? For me, one guy off the top of my list, off the top of my head, rather, and first off, I'm going to say Dallas Cowboys owner, Jerry Jones. I think, he got in for more of the behind the scenes stuff that owners do as far as working on TV deals and nuances of the game, this, that, and the third. One thing for me with Jerry Jones, because it's not just the players, it's also the contributors. The thing is this: Jerry Jones, and this is something that's not talked about a lot. He is a guy that really pushed for the National Football League to return to the city of Los Angeles, and of course, we've seen both the Rams and Chargers back there for about 6 or 7 years right now, go give or take. But the problem is this, and this is a lot of the backdoor politics with the National Football League. It didn't happen as far as the teams going back to LA until Al Davis died, because of course there was some backdoor politics that Al Davis talked about when he was still in LA with the Raiders. He basically had a deal uh, for a new stadium in Hollywood Park, and the NFL nixed it because they wanted him to take an additional team in there, which resulted in him going back to Oakland. And you figure, as big and powerful as the National Football League is, they went about 2 decades without having a team in the second biggest media market in the United States, and I'm talking about Los Angeles. And I just find it funny that as soon as Al Davis died, now all of a sudden the NFL's gung ho about returning to LA. It's about the politics of it, because you figure, I know Robert Kraft was up before and he didn't make it. And, Robert Kraft, he has led his team to more championships than Jerry Jones did. And you think about that not just a 20-year run that the Patriots had with Tom Brady, 10 of their 11 Super Bowl appearances as a franchise, the New England Patriots, have come on Robert Kraft's watch. Because remember, he did get there once with Bill Parcells as his head coach, but Robert Kraft has not gotten into the Hall of Fame, and I think one of the or two of the big reasons why are Spygate and also Deflategate. It's going to be a long time. Unfortunately, they're going to hold it over him um, as far as getting in there. Paul Tagliabue. Typically, we see commissioners of the league get put in. Pete Rozelle got put in for his contributions, but the owners, unfortunately, are holding it against Paul Tagliabue after he ruled in favor of the players as an independent arbiter in that whole Bounty Gate situation with the New Orleans Saints. So that's just my 2 cents on some guys. There are some players as well that I'm kind of, but you know what? At the end of the day, it is what it is. Um, Mets, you're also saying, yeah, I think you just got to wait it out, just give it some time, and he should be in there. He's going to get there. He's going to get there. It ain't going to happen next year, and it's not going to happen the year after that. But I will say this, and it's going to be a very interesting scenario for Eli. And it comes down to his draft classmates. I'm talking about Philip Rivers, and I'm talking about Big Ben Roethlisberger. And of course, uh, those three quarterbacks were taken in round number one back in 2004. And I've long talked about it. I feel like all three of those guys ended up in the right places. I think, it was one of those where a lot of people thought the Giants would draft Big Ben at number 4. He fell to the Steelers at number 11. And of course, the Chargers were hell bent on taking Eli in spite of the fact that Eli let it be known that he didn't want to play there. And of course, they got their deal done. Giants drafted Rivers. They had that draft day trade, and the rest is history. But I don't think Philip Rivers' style would have fit in with the New York media, in my opinion. And we saw some of the off the field issues with Big Ben in Pittsburgh. I think he was able to get away with that more in Pittsburgh than he would have been in New York. And I just think Eli just had the right mindset to play in the New York area. And the reason why I bring it up is this: playing, in like certain cities as a professional athlete, it's not meant for everybody. You figure the New York media and the New York fans can get on a player. And I've seen it where some players just get caught up in the wash, if you will. Philly's another place like that. Okay. You gotta have tough skin to deal with the fans and the media at times. And Eli, he's always been a guy that really nothing ever phased him, good, bad, or indifferent. And I think he had the perfect temperament uh, to play in the New York area. And at the end of the day, it worked out. But nonetheless, I've been saying this for the last couple of years, and I'll put it out there right now. I think Eli, Big Ben, and Philip Rivers are attached to the hip. And with that said, if you're going to put in one, you got to put them all in. Okay. Of course, Ben Roethlisberger played a little bit longer. The same can be said for Philip Rivers. Rivers' numbers were slightly better than Eli, and he made more Pro Bowls. The same thing can be said for Big Ben. Won a pair of Super Bowls, got there 3 times with the Steelers, and of course, Eli has 2 championships as well. But in my opinion, I think all 3 of those guys are attached at the hip. I think they all will get in. However, I think if Big Ben gets in right away, which wouldn't surprise me, I think it's going to ruffle the feathers of some folks that want to see Eli Manning get in. But like I said, he will get in. It's not a matter of if, it's more like when. You're saying this is never going to happen, but I feel like they should have a brother Hall of Fame, and this is for all sports, like Eli and Peyton Manning, King Griffey Jr. and King Griffey Sr., Vlad Guerrero and Vlad Guerrero Jr. and Sr. Well, I'll put it like this, in some cases, there are brothers who play sports that are both good enough. And of course, the Sharps today, yesterday rather, just became the first brother combination in football history to be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Of course, Rondé Barber is there, and there are some people who feel that if Tiki Barber had not retired prematurely, that he was on the fast track to getting into Canton, and the Barbers possibly could have had it. People thought it was going to be the Mannings. I also think about the Matthews. I'm talking about Clay Matthews Jr. as well as Bruce Matthews. But of course, at some point, maybe we'll see Clay Matthews the third there. Just throwing it out there. But nonetheless, I do think both Mannings will get there at some point. And I'm going to throw out a name of another brother combo that's not eligible for the Hall of Fame yet, but they will be. And I'm talking about the Watts. JJ Watt will definitely be a Hall of Famer. And his brother TJ, who's probably going to finish with better stats than JJ, will get there as well. And of course, it's going to be one interesting question that people might ask: who's the better Watt? I mean, JJ Watt was just a freak of nature. Okay, he had some when he first came on the scene with the Houston Texans. I mean, that guy played like his hair was on fire, and I think TJ was able to sit back and learn from Big Brother, if you will. And of course, TJ himself is in the midst of having himself a phenomenal NFL career. But like some of these guys as well that I feel like should be in there. I talked about Dan Reeves as a head coach, Marty Schottenheimer, more than 200 wins as an NFL head coach, got the Cleveland Browns to the playoffs multiple times, the Kansas City Chiefs, got the San Diego Chargers, and I have no problem saying San Diego because it's still San Diego to me. Got them to the Hall of Fame. But of course, unfortunately, people are using his playoff record against him. But nonetheless, that guy can coach. Great pass rushers that are not in there. The likes of Leslie O'Neal, Al Bubba Baker, who as a rookie, I think it was in 1978 for the Detroit Lions, had 23 sacks. Of course, a sack did not become an official NFL stat until 1982. You think about Coy Bacon, so many good years at the Cincinnati Bengals. Simeon Rice is another guy. Okay. And you think about that famed Tampa 2 defense that helped them win a championship. Okay. You've got Rondé Barber in there. You've got Derek Brooks. You've got John Lynch. You've got Warren Sapp, all from that defense. Simeon Rice is right in that mix. And I definitely think at some point he's got to get himself a gold jacket. You're saying, didn't TJ Watt, tie Michael Strahan with 22 and a half sacks for the most in a season? He did. And the only thing was, it was official. That's the only reason. Because I'm saying that is because when Al Bubba Baker did it in '78, the sack wasn't an official stat. So the official record is 22 and a half. It's shared by Michael Strahan and it's shared by TJ Watt. Of course, Don't mention that to Mark Gastineau. He might still lose a gasket over that. Darren Woodson is another guy who's right there. Great safety in the 1990s and early 2000s for the Dallas Cowboys. Of course, NY sports lover, you might not want to hear that. Of course, being a Giant fan, we know about what goes on in the NFC East with the Giants and Dallas. Speaking of Dallas, Harvey Martin, off of that famed doomsday defense of the 1970s and early 1980s for the Dallas Cowboys, continues to get overlooked at the wide receiver position. Steve Smith Sr. He's got to get in because I think what hurt the wide receiver and what has hurt the wide receiver position for some time now is that the numbers, and you try to compare the numbers of the eras, and I think those numbers are starting to taper off a little bit. And we're talking about a guy like Steve Smith Sr., who's still top 10 in receiving yards, had so many great years for the Carolina Panthers, then went to the Baltimore Ravens and had some solid years to end his career. I think he's very deserving. We talk about the Colts of Peyton Manning's era. Of course, he's in there. Of course, wide receiver Marvin Harrison is in there. We can't overlook the other wide receiver from that era for Indianapolis, and I'm talking about Reggie Wayne. Henry Elliott is a guy who gets looked over a lot. You look at Torrey Holt. We've got Isaac Bruce in there. We've got Kurt Warner in there. We've got Marshall Faulk from the greatest show on turf for the then St. Louis Rams. Torrey Big Game Holt definitely put up some big numbers in that mix as well. You're saying, is Marshawn Lynch a Hall of Famer if Russell Wilson doesn't throw that pick on the 3-yard line? I'll tell you like this because that is a very good question. I think there are more guys that would probably be in the mix of things. And here's why. For that Seattle team, because I truly do feel that Pete Carroll lost that team, and I'm not the first person to say it, and I ain't gonna be the last. Pete Carroll lost that team because after that game, everybody knew where Seattle's bread how their bread was buttered. Okay, you've got the ball within a half-yard line, and everybody knew where that ball was going. And of course, Seattle got cute. And I think things would have been totally different. I think at the moment, beast mode uh, doesn't get it, but it's definitely something on the category of what could have been. But I think numbers wise, he simply does not get in my opinion. I could be wrong. Everson Walls is another guy. You think about, a guy with more than 50 career interceptions in the NFL, had some phenomenal seasons with the Dallas Cowboys, went to the New York Giants in 1990, helped them win the championship. And he's a guy, in my opinion, who continues to get overlooked. 11 interceptions as a rookie in 1981 as a member of the Dallas Cowboys. You're saying you wish that Saquon broke the yards record. He is really a beast. However, last record was done in a 16-game season where Barkley, if he did it, clearly he was going to have to do it in 17. You're also saying the Giants could have spent the money on him, but again, he does deserve his ring. Well, I'll say this. You and I know that if Saquon had stayed with the Giants, he wouldn't have been anywhere close to the record. And the Philadelphia Eagles are probably not getting ready to play the Super Bowl in about 48 hours, give or take. It's one of those where the Giants has finished this season, I do believe, with a record of 4-13. Oh, I know you hate the Eagles. If you're a Giants fan, you hate the Eagles. That's sacrilege right there. As far as how Giant fans feel about the Eagles fans, and vice versa. There is literally, and I mean literally, no love lost between those two fan bases. And the Eagle fans, they can get outright nasty. Matter of fact, when I was in college, I had some Eagle fans who lived in my dorm, the floor above me, the room above me. So yeah, I know. But nonetheless, you figure the Giants won 4-13 this past season with Saquon, and again without Saquon. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about Eli's Hall of Fame case, is the fact that that organization didn't do him any favors as far as the second half of his career because they made bad personnel decisions, and of course that has continued. And it affected Saquon so much because we really didn't get to see him for the most part live up to that true potential. Now he's living up to that true potential. And clearly it would have been one of those things if he had played against the Giants in week 18, he would have gotten his record. I think it would have kind of been poetic justice for him to do it in that fashion against his former team. And you're saying, yeah, that would have been in 17 games. But on the flip side, okay, Eric Dickerson does hold the record, and he did it 2,105 yards in a 16-game season. But OJ Simpson was the first to rush for 2,000 yards in 1973, and he did it in a 14-game season. So again, every era, has, a little something different. But, getting back to Saquon, I'll say this, he's basically now showing the potential that he had coming into the National Football League, and it just shows you what happens when you're playing on a bad team for so long. You kind of get lost up in that wash. But some other guys who I think who are deserving for the Hall of Fame as well. Pat Fisher, phenomenal defensive back for so many years for Washington. Rodney Harrison, and Rodney Harrison is a guy who I think he falls into the category of, some people label him as a dirty player. Some people didn't like him, but you're talking about as a DB, more than 30 sacks and 30 interceptions. Not a lot of guys who've played in the NFL can say that. And Rodney Harrison, as a strong safety, was one of the last real enforcers in the NFL before things really started getting cracked down because of player safety. Heel, you're asking, can you make the Hall of Fame as a running back if you have a great passing quarterback, or is it better to have an average QB to get your numbers up? I mean, wow, that's a good question. Because like you got me thinking right now because I'm thinking about some of the great backs. And you think about, okay, the NFL's all-time leading rusher, Emmitt Smith. Granted, his quarterback Troy Aikman is in the Hall of Fame, but as great as Troy Aikman was, and this is no disrespect to Troy Aikman or any Dallas Cowboys fan out there, Troy was really never asked to go out there and win the game. You figure for the Cowboys, when they were winning, a typical Troy Aikman passing line would be like 18 of 24 for maybe 200 yards and two touchdowns. But at the same time, Emmitt Smith would have 25 to 30 carries for like a buck 50, maybe a buck 60. And Dallas would go out there and take care of their business. So, I mean, it does happen. I mean, we've seen great quarterbacks, with, running backs that are not in the Hall of Fame. You look at Joe Montana. A lot of those years were with Roger Craig at running back for the San Francisco 49ers. Roger Craig was a phenomenal ball carrier for the 49ers. Some people think he should be in the Hall of Fame. I think he's in the Hall of Very Good, in my opinion. Roger Craig was the first running back, I do believe, to have 1,000 yards receiving and rushing in the same season. So, you know, it depends. But I will say like this: I think about the K gun with the Buffalo Bills in the 1990s. Jim Kelly, of course, a Hall of Fame quarterback. Thurman Thomas, Hall of Fame quarterback, running back, excuse me, and both of them were great at what they did. Jim Kelly, phenomenal quarterback. Thurman Thomas, phenomenal running back. You think about the Rams with the greatest show on turf, Marshall Faulk, and phenomenal, uh, running back. You think about Kurt Warner, at quarterback. So it is possible to have a great quarterback and a great running back that really just feed off of one another. You're saying, NY Sports Lover, in 2022, you love the Giants. They made it to the playoffs, won against the Vikings, but lost against the Eagles. Yeah, Philly was and still is the better team. To be honest, the only players I really even know are Malik Neighbors and Tommy DeVito. I'll tell you like this: the Giants have been bad, and of course, it goes back to how it started, as far as that back end of Eli's career. But nonetheless, it's so bad for the Giants right now that if some of those guys, that play for the Giants, went out there in Manhattan and probably tried to get into some clubs, they probably have to wait online as opposed to just being walked in because nobody knows who they are. The Giants do need a quarterback. I've talked about that for some while, and I definitely will be talking about it more with the offseason about to start. Um, Around the NFL. Finally, my last guy that I'm talking about who should be in the Hall of Fame and continues to get overlooked is Eugene Robinson. Phenomenal safety for so many years, first with the Seahawks, then with the Packers, and then with the Atlanta Falcons. But of course, for some people, unfortunately, when they think about Eugene Robinson, they think about him getting busted with an undercover police officer for solicitation the night before Super Bowl 33 when the Falcons lost to the Broncos. You're saying NY Sports Lover Barkley was my favorite player, and I have that Giants jersey of him, but it pains me to wear it. God forbid I see an Eagles fan wearing that. I'll tell you like this, probably this year, that Saquon Barkley jersey, definitely one of the more popular selling jerseys for the Philadelphia Eagles, maybe even in the NFL as a whole. But in regards to the Hall of Fame, and like I keep saying that Eli's probably going to have to wait a while. I talked about Drew Brees being a first time, um, ballot on the first, like having his first year on the ballot for next year. Some other guys to keep an eye out for. Jason Witten, a name that you might not want to hear, famed tight end for so many years with the Dallas Cowboys. I can't guarantee that he gets in because I think about guys like Shannon Sharp that had to wait. So I don't know. Larry Fitzgerald at wide receiver. Fitz, I think, gets in. Again, going back to what you were saying about To before, people liked Fitz, and that's not to say, like I said before, it shouldn't be a popularity contest as far as who likes you or who doesn't like you, as far as what you do. However, Fitz got it done. And outside of Kurt Warner, those a couple of years that he had Kurt Warner as his quarterback, Larry Fitzgerald did it with guys who were really not good quarterbacks. So I think that will be factored in. And then, like I said before, Philip Rivers. Okay. Again, I think him, Eli, and Big Ben are attached at the hip for all of that. NY Sports, you're saying you only got one subscriber. Well, brother, I'm gonna tell you like this. When this is all said and done, you're gonna have at least two because I'm definitely gonna sign up and I want to hear what you got to talk about. So that's listen, that is a given. That's no ifs, ands, or buts right there. Hill, you're saying you live in the UK. What's going on? Well, I'll tell you like this. First and foremost, what's going on to you on the other side of the pond? Okay. And you were saying you were underwhelmed by Joe Flacco when he played in London a few years ago. How good was he? Well, Joe Flacco is kind of was kind of in that category, like Eli. He had some flashes, he put it together, and then he had a contract year in 2012 for the Ravens. They didn't extend him, and with each win that he got that season, his value, his asking price went up, and of course, Flacco led or helped the Ravens win the Super Bowl that year. Was Super Bowl MVP. Had a phenomenal playoff run, and then, of course, it wasn't working out for him towards the tail end of his career with the Ravens, which led to them drafting Lamar Jackson. But you know what? Joe Flacco looked like a guy who was content to be retired at home. Then he came back, with the Jets, and then the Cleveland Browns helped Cleveland get to the playoffs in 2023. Came back with the Colts this year. And Joe Flacco is a guy I don't think who gets into the Hall of Fame. He had some Hall of Fame moments, yes, but I simply don't see him uh, getting there. But for me, I'm not sure how long Eli's going to have to wait. And I think this is something that's not going to go away anytime soon because I just don't see him getting in 2026 because you've got Philip Rivers and Eli and Drew Brees coming around the bend, and then it's going to be Big Ben, and then it's going to be Tom Brady, and I definitely think they're going to put Tom Brady and Drew Brees in before they put Eli Manning in. So it's going to be one of those where Eli might have, some more salt in his hair as opposed to pepper. Maybe not a full head of salt, if you know what I mean, as far as the dark hairs becoming gray hairs. But nonetheless, I think at some point he will get in. Like I said before, Eli has had some Hall of Fame moments, but it's one of those where just comparing him to the guys that he played against, and just because somebody didn't get in right away, doesn't mean that they're not going to get in eventually. A no today doesn't mean a no forever. That's just how I feel. You're saying to me, Jay Cutler had more impressive flashes than Eli. I'll tell you like this: Jay Cutler had a stronger arm. Jay Cutler had bigger passing gains, but at the end of the day, Jay Cutler, to me, I think was more like the modern day Jeff George, guy with a big arm, but he just never uh, put it all together. And of course, he never really had those big playoff moments. And of course, in a lot of people's minds, when they think about Jay Cutler in the playoffs, they're going to go back to that 2010 NFC Championship game where the Bears lost at home to the Packers, and Jay Cutler hurt his knee and took himself out of the game. And I do think he was legitimately hurt. But some of those same people are going to say, hey, a couple of years before that in the postseason, Philip Rivers hurt his knee and he went out there, balled out, had the ACL surgery during the week, and still came out and played against the Patriots in the AFC Championship game. So I don't think Jay Cutler's name will ever be up there. Um, you were saying NY Sports, you were at the game where Alonzo hit that three-run home run in the ninth. Also, is my favorite player. Also on my channel, I posted a video of me at the game and Alonzo hitting the home run. Listen, I'm definitely going to check it out. And I'll tell you what, while you are here, please put the link to your channel in the chat box. Anybody else can check that out as well. I'll tell you like this. Um, I think after that home run alone, okay, we don't know what else Pete Alonso's going to do for the Mets. I talked about it last night. I definitely think he will now be the Mets all-time home run leader, switching gears very quickly, if you will. But I think after that home run, he probably won't have to buy another drink in the New York area anytime soon. And even though it didn't lead to the Mets, uh, winning the championship, but definitely, that's how I feel about it. But getting back to Eli Manning, um, just because they tell you no today, it doesn't mean no forever. I think Eli, he's saying all of the right things publicly. He's not going to let it define him. But it's one of those. This is only the first time around the bend, and even though it might not come today or tomorrow, as far as Eli getting into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, listen, he had himself a successful career, 16 years in the NFL, 16 years with one team. That's something that a lot of guys can't say. Even his brother, the Hall of Fame quarterback, Peyton, didn't play his entire career with one team. It was the Colts and the Broncos. And of course, Eli's dad, Archie, started off with the Saints, also spent time with the Houston Oilers as well as the Minnesota Vikings. So it's a rarity and it's a blessing for one guy in sports to play his career with one team. Eli made a ton of money playing for the Giants. He also made a ton of money with endorsements in the New York City area because not only is a starting quarterback for the Giants, but also leading them to two championships, being a two-time Super Bowl MVP, and of course, for New York fans and New York sports lover, you probably know this. Anytime a New York team can beat a Boston team, they love you there. Okay. And the fact that he did it to the Patriots and also the fact that he did it to Tom Brady and Bill Belichick will allow him to live in New York lore forever. And I'll tell you like this, speaking of the Giants and speaking of Eli Manning, his head coach at that time, he might get in there at some point as well. Tom Coughlin, of course, Coughlin, prior to becoming the head coach of the Giants, had a lot of success with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Two of Jacksonville's three AFC Championship game appearances came on Tom Coughlin's watch, and then, of course, those two Super Bowl wins for the New York Football Giants. So I definitely think that Coughlin will get some love as well. Thank you for subscribing to the channel NY Sports. And Heel, you're asking, does it hurt the Hall of Fame if great players don't get in. The Dwight Howard top 75 thing hurt the NBA bad. There are some guys, and there are some great guys, excuse me, that do get overlooked. And I'll say it like this because, like, just switching gears to basketball for a minute, there were a lot of people that had to go to bat for a guy like Dennis Rodman to get into the Hall of Fame. And a lot of people feel that Dennis Rodman is the greatest rebounder in NBA history. Okay, so sometimes some guys do get overlooked. I don't think it's on purpose because, like everything else, there's backdoor politics to go on. There's a lot of conversations by people, and there's things that are held against people fairly or unfairly that don't allow them to get into the Hall of Fame for whatever sport and get their just due. I talked about the whole Robert Kraft situation. I talked about the whole Paul Tagliabue situation earlier, and it's unfortunate. I don't agree with it. It is what it is. But me personally, I simply don't agree with it. If somebody is good enough to be there for the Hall of Fame, regardless of the sport, okay, it should be all about the merit and what that person did on the playing field. Dante Spate, what's going on? You're saying why the NFL left Tom Brady and Eli Manning out of that? They're supposed to be in the Hall of Fame. Well, Tom Brady's not eligible yet. He will be, I think, in 2027. It's either 2027 or 2028. Whenever it's 5 years after you stop playing. So Tom Brady's definitely going to get in there the first time around. Um, Eli, like I said, he's going to have to wait a little bit. And those quarterbacks that are coming after him, might push him a little bit further down the draw. Like I said, he's going to get in there at some point. Maybe before the end of this decade. We got to wait and see. But he's definitely going to be in the mix. Giant fans are going to continue to clamor for Eli Manning, and I am not disagreeing with them because I mean that guy. He's one of those guys. And I followed Eli's career. Okay, when you pushed the chips to the middle of the table, and it was a big game, he was one of the best to have ever done it. And a lot of people, as far as those championships, will focus on 2007, but 2011, he had a phenomenal season. I think he threw for close to 5,000 yards during the regular season. They beat the Patriots in Foxborough during the regular season that year, and I think they had an amazing number of comeback wins in the fourth quarter. And he was a guy that he was just locked in the fourth. And going back to when the Giants, acquired Eli because they didn't draft him. Okay, he was through a trade. The Giants general manager at that time, Ernie Accorsi, he compared him to John Elway. And the reason why this is coming out of Ole Miss, and the reason why he did do it is because, you know, of the moxie that Eli had when the game was on the line. And you saw that, throughout the bulk of his career. And it got to the point, um, like you saw like how some of the people like gravitated to him, this, that, and the third. His teammates always went to bat for him. And even the Giants defense in those days, they always, especially in 2011, they always went out there and they found a way to make the big play to get Eli back the ball. And it's a little bit different, regardless of the team, regardless of quarterback. But when you have that guy at that position that you feel, you know what, we got to do whatever we got to do to get the ball in his hands and he can go out there and win the game. So if you're down four, you make that key stop and you get him back to football. You think about a guy, like Brett Favre in his prime with the Packers, Joe Montana, whether it was the Niners or the Chiefs, Dan Marino, Aaron Rodgers, so many other great quarterbacks over the years. You gotta like as a defensive player, you do whatever you gotta do. And then when the offense gets the ball back, guys step up and make those big plays. And of course, you think back to those two Super Bowls for the Giants, two of the biggest catches in Super Bowl history that were thrown from the right arm of Eli Manning. Of course, Super Bowl 42, the infamous David Tyree catch, another guy who will never have to buy another drink or a meal in the New York City area. And then, of course, the Mario Manningham catch that Eli threw in Super Bowl number 46. Now, I think that was the first play of that game-winning drive, and I really think that set the tone, and the rest is history. Um, NY sports lover, you're saying Brady just needs to wait, but no doubt he's making it. Trust me, ain't no way in the world that we're going to be talking about Tom Brady as a second ballot Hall of Famer. I mean, if Tom Brady doesn't make it in, I'm just putting it out there hypothetically. Okay, if he doesn't make it in the first time around, not only will the folks in Boston and in the New England area that love and adore the Patriots will have an issue. But I think the folks in West Florida, the Tampa Bay Buccaneer fans that gravitated to him in a very short period of time, they're going to have a big time issue with that. If he doesn't get in. Hill, you're saying being from the UK where soccer is our first sport. I feel Americans don't appreciate kickers, especially factoring in that the ball is not round. There are some kickers that have Hall of Fame technique. It's funny that you mentioned that. I'm gonna give you a long or the short first. So, back in the days, NFL kickers, they used to be basically linemen or guys from other positions that were kicking, and they would just like kick straight on to the goal. It wasn't until I think the 1960s, right? And then the Giants, coincidentally, brought this guy in, Pete Gogolak, a soccer style kicker, and he was a guy that started kicking from the angle. And of course, since then, the rest is history. All of these kickers do it. We only have one kicker in the Hall of Fame. No, it's a couple of kickers rather. One off the top of my head that I know for a fact is Morton Anderson, and punter. The only punter that's there is Ray Guy. I feel like the special teams, if you will, especially when it comes to the kickers, people as a whole don't respect them because they don't feel it's important. However, look at how many kickers get criticized when they don't make the necessary kicks. It is a very crucial part of the game, and I'll ask anybody because I've been on the field, when I played, clearly not at the NFL level, and I've seen guys do 40 or 45-yard kicks. Um, it's not that close, okay, from where they're kicking, as far as like kicking it, through the uprights, okay? And this was like in September when the elements were nice. But we're talking about some of these guys going out there November, December, January when that football is ice cold and you got to deal with the wind and all of that stuff. And speaking of that, that's why I feel like a guy like Adam Vinatieri should be there. So many big kicks for the New England Patriots, especially that kick against the Raiders back in the 2001 divisional round that really kickstarted things for the New England Patriots run. Okay. There have been some great kickers over the years that definitely uh, do deserve that in my opinion. Um, you're also saying NY sports, also being from America, we call football soccer and American football, even though you use your hands. So call it soccer, but I agree with it. I'll tell you like this. Um, my wife played soccer, and it's one of those where uh, the technique and the footwork that is needed for that sport is amazing. I'll throw something at you right now. Just switching gears to another sport, basketball. You think about the great Hakeem Olajuwon. He got his start with soccer, and that allowed him to dominate like he did, at the center position for so many years in the National Basketball Association. Phenomenal footwork, and I don't think that soccer players get enough credit for that. That is a tremendous skill. Um, NY Sports, you're asking, is Justin Tucker going to make it into the Hall of Fame? Still a long way to go. You're talking about, I think, the most accurate kicker in the NFL, in NFL history, but I'll switch gears right now with all of the accusations because ain't none, we don't know right now. It's only accusations. Again, I think if some of that does turn out to be true, I do think that the NFL would hold that against him as far as getting into the Hall of Fame. That's just my opinion. Um, you saying all this talk about kickers makes me think about wide right. Listen, I know some people, um, and you got to be very technical though, because wide right is not just bad when you're talking to Buffalo Bills fans. Wide right is also bad when you're talking to Florida State football fans because they went through it, their fair share of times as well. So again, there are a lot of championships that are won and lost by the legs of kickers. So again, the guys that do make them, I truly do feel need to get more credit than they deserve. And Heel, you're saying, yes, Kobe had the best footwork ever. He played soccer in Italy as a kid. And also, Kobe, after Akeem retired, Kobe went down to Texas and worked on technique with Akeem and learned how to play the post better. And of course, the rest was history as far as the basketball career went for the late Kobe Bean. Yeah, Bills fan. Oh gosh, don't even get me started with that one last year. That was a tough one, and I know some Buffalo fans. They're still gut wrenched by that, and of course, what just happened in the AFC Championship game a couple of weeks ago didn't just added to it. But of course, if you're a Buffalo fan, some you save some grace because your guy at quarterback, Josh Allen, is now the reigning NFL MVP. Uh, but that's a whole nother conversation for another day. But like I said, not surprised, and I don't think Eli Manning was either, that he didn't make the Hall of Fame. He'll be there at some point, but of course, NY Sports, you can totally attest to this. He's in the Hall of Fame for the Giants, and I say that in more ways than one. He's already in the Giants Hall of Fame. We know that. Nobody will ever wear jersey number 10 again for the Giants. Definitely in my lifetime. Okay, that's what Eli Manning meant to that franchise, and of course, Eli Manning will always be a guy who is revered by Giant fans, revered and respected. You win a championship, you do it in the New York area, and of course, in the fashion that Eli did it against the Patriots and arguably the greatest quarterback ever, and he did it twice. So Eli Manning will always be in the Hall of Fame for the Giants and of course their fan base. He'll never have to buy anything, that he in the New York area again because that is how he's revered there. However, Pro Football Hall of Fame is a little bit different, and I think he's going to have to wait a little bit. But at some point, he will get in. It's not a matter of if; it's more like a matter of when. And at the end of the day, Pro Football Hall of Fame is a process, just like the Baseball Hall of Fame. We've seen some guys be close on the cusp, and then they finally broke through. Billy Wagner was close for a couple of years. He finally broke through and got into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Excuse me. This year, it's a process for some guys. Whereas for some guys, like I said, the elite of the elite, regardless of the position, they can cakewalk in because they were of that elitist status. Eli Manning, I know you can't spell elite without Eli, but at the end of the day, he wasn't the elite of the elite at quarterback. His brother was Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, guys like that. They were in another stratosphere, if you will. No disrespect to Eli, but nonetheless, he's still a guy, one of the better quarterbacks of his era. He's always going to be remembered for Super Bowls 42 and 46. But I do think he's going to have to wait some time before he gets his bust in can. At the end of the day, it is what it is. And I don't think Eli's shedding any tears about it. But folks, that is going to wrap this one up. And I want to take this time out to thank each and every one of you for tuning in to this edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. For anybody who liked and what they saw and heard on this podcast, please feel free to hit that like button as well as subscribing to this channel. It is definitely greatly appreciated. NY Sports, I definitely appreciate what I got from you tonight. I'm definitely going to check you out. So you are going to definitely have at least one more subscriber. And I'm also going to share you on other social media platforms as well. So we got to get those subscribers up for you, my man. Heal, as always, it was a pleasure, especially talking to you from the other side of the pond, my man. Definitely appreciate it. And trust me, I got a lot to talk about in the world of basketball coming up this weekend as well as going into next week. He'll so definitely keep me chimed in. Keep yourself tuned, chimed into this channel rather. Dante Spate, definitely appreciate you checking me out on this channel as well. Also, everybody, if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it will be my pleasure to follow you right back. And there's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. Thank you, everyone, for chiming in tonight. As always, I appreciate the love. I always appreciate the support. And as always, my name is William Martin. I'm signing off and I'm saying thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.